This happened when I was a freshman in high school. I lived in a pretty small town, one of those places that felt kind of stuck in the past. Lots of trees, lots of space between houses. Everything was surrounded by woods, and nothing was really packed close together. Our home was actually tucked deep into the forest. My parents owned a fair bit of land, and my dad had built the house himself, with the help of his father. There wasn't a proper road leading to our place, just a long dirt path. Because of that, the school buses wouldn't stop anywhere near our house. I had to either walk a mile to a friend's place to get picked up, or just hike all the way to school on foot. Most days I chose the latter. On this particular day, everything felt normal. I was walking the trail from my house, taking in the peaceful sounds of the woods, when I noticed something strange up ahead. A car. It wasn't one I recognized. It didn't belong to my parents or anyone I knew. And it was parked right on the trail, which only led to our house. So seeing a random vehicle there was definitely unusual. Actually, I couldn't remember ever seeing an unfamiliar car there before. The whole thing made me uneasy. As I walked past the car, I saw a woman sitting inside. She looked like she was in her late 30s or early 40s, with messy black hair and dark circles under her eyes. She glanced at me, and I quickly looked down, but I could feel her gaze following me as I passed. I picked up my pace and got to school without saying anything. That night at dinner, I brought it up to my parents. I asked them if they knew who she was, or why someone would be parked there. Both of them looked concerned right away. They told me she probably just got lost, and that I shouldn't worry about it. But I could tell by the way they exchanged looks that they were alarmed. For the next week, both of my parents started driving me to school. It was strange because they usually left for work really early, like 6 a.m., so it meant they had to rearrange their schedules just to take me. They must have been late to work every single day that week. At the time, I thought they were kind of overreacting. I figured I was old enough to walk alone, but I knew they were just being cautious. The following Monday, I packed my bag and headed out on foot again. We hadn't seen the woman or her car at all during that past week, so I figured it was no big deal anymore. But when I got to the same spot on the trail, there she was. Same car, same spot. Just sitting there again, watching. My heart sank. There was no way this was just chance. She had come back twice now, only when I was walking alone, and only to this trail that led directly to our house. It felt deliberate. I decided I wasn't going to walk past her again. Instead, I veered off into the woods, hoping to avoid her. But as soon as I stepped off the path, she started her engine and inched the car forward toward me. I tried to ignore her, walking quicker between the trees. Then I heard her car door open. Leaves crunched under her feet as she began walking after me. And then, in a voice that was eerily soft and almost affectionate, she called out my full name. That stopped me in my tracks. I turned to look and saw her. Her face was blank, her eyes heavy and sunken. She had this strange, pale appearance, like she hadn't slept in days. That look sent me into a panic. I turned and ran as fast as I could. After losing sight of her, I made my way back through the woods and returned to my house. I called my parents right away, and they came home immediately and also contacted the police. What I didn't expect was that my parents knew exactly who she was. It turned out she was my dad's former wife, someone he had divorced nearly 20 years ago. Apparently, she had struggled with serious mental health problems for a long time, and had gone through disturbing obsessive phases in the past. The day I first mentioned seeing her, my parents had already guessed who it was, and had reached out to the authorities, but the police didn't take it seriously. They checked on her and claimed she seemed fine, but for that entire week, she had been lurking near our house, waiting, watching, knowing that once my parents left early for work, I would be walking that trail alone. My parents never told me much after that. I don't know what ended up happening to her, or what exactly she had in mind that day in the woods. I still don't understand what she wanted or why she was following me like that. I just hope that whatever it was, it never happens again. I live in a modest house tucked in a quiet, generally safe neighborhood. I also work remotely, and my home office is set up in a small room upstairs. My desk sits right next to a window that faces the front yard. I liked being able to open it for fresh air, especially during pleasant weather. This all happened during early fall, so I usually kept the window open throughout the day. One ordinary weekday around noon, while I was working as usual, something outside caught my eye. A man was standing at the bottom of my driveway, not walking past or stopping for a reason, just standing there staring up toward the house. I couldn't tell for sure if he could see me through the window, but after a few moments of me watching him, he simply turned and walked off. It was odd, for sure, but I didn't really know what to make of it. I brushed it off and went back to work. I glanced out the window occasionally for the rest of the day, but saw nothing else. I tried not to dwell on it. The next day followed the same routine. I had a full day of work ahead and was pretty tied up with virtual meetings. During one of those calls, my attention drifted, and I found myself looking out the window again, and there he was. The same man standing in the exact same spot at the edge of the driveway, staring up at my house again. Something about seeing him a second time felt significantly more disturbing. Why would he return? I must have zoned out, because one of my coworkers noticed I looked uneasy and asked if something was wrong. I told them everything was fine and tried to focus, but I kept looking back toward the window. He stood there a while longer and then gone. The rest of the day dragged. I couldn't shake the image of that man watching the house. After work, I stepped outside to check around the driveway, wondering if maybe something out here had caught his attention, but everything looked normal. Then I realized something. My office window was clearly visible from where he had been standing, which meant there was a good chance he had seen me watching him from inside. I went back and made dinner and had a call with my brother that night. I told him about the man and the strange behavior. He agreed it was definitely weird, though he figured it was probably nothing to worry about. After we hung up, I tried to relax with some TV. A couple of hours passed. It was around 9 p.m., and I had turned the volume down low since I was starting to get tired. Because of that, I was able to hear what sounded like footsteps outside. I jumped up from the couch and stared at the front door. The steps came right up to it, paused for a moment, then continued on. I quickly rushed to the peephole and looked outside. I could barely make out a figure heading down toward the road. Once he was far enough away, I opened the door. That's when I saw it, a small note taped to the back of the door. It was brief and unsettling. It read, "Pat, answer the door." I was frozen. How did he know my name? And what was the point of the note? He hadn't even knocked, hadn't stayed long enough for me to possibly open the door. Not that I would have, that was enough for me. I called the police. 2 officers arrived, and I explained everything. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. They took notes and told me to contact them again if anything else happened. It didn't exactly put me at ease that night. I couldn't sleep. I stayed in bed for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of that man watching the house and that disturbing message he'd left. Then, sometime just before 2 a.m., a knock echoed through the house. It was so quiet that the sound practically filled every corner. I froze. The silence that followed was almost louder than the knock itself. A few seconds later, another knock. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. The dispatcher stayed on the line and told me officers were on their way. Meanwhile, the knocking kept going. It wasn't frantic or violent, just steady, unchanging, repeated. It felt like an eternity passed, the knocking never speeding up or slowing down, just continuing at that same chilling rhythm. The dispatcher updated me. Officers were 2 minutes out. Then, right after that, the rhythm changed. A longer gap between knocks, 15 seconds, then 30, then nothing for a full minute. When the officers arrived, no one was at the door. Again, they had just missed him. This time, they seemed to take things a little more seriously, but still there wasn't much they could do. They told me they'd have a patrol car make rounds in the area for the next couple of weeks. Those weeks came and went. As far as I could tell, the man never came back. He didn't show up at the door or at the edge of the driveway again. It's been a few months since then, and I haven't seen or heard anything. else. But the thought of that note, the one telling me to answer the door, still haunts me. And knowing someone was knocking at my house in the middle of the night, asking for me by name, is just chilling. What's worse is not knowing who it was, what they wanted, or if they're ever going to return. This happened back in 2019. I was working evenings at a grocery store, usually on the closing shift, and I lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. We had our fair share of regular customers, people who came in often, usually around the same time. One of them was this guy who always showed up just before we locked up a couple nights each week. Nobody ever caught his name, but everyone on staff knew who he was, mostly because we all dreaded customers who wandered in 10 minutes before closing. I was typically the last cashier on duty, so I ended up dealing with him most of the time. He gave off an odd vibe, barely spoke, always looked worn down, and had a sort of vacant expression. That night was no different. He came in late, grabbed a few items, and headed to my register. We barely spoke, aside from a quick hello. He paid and left. That was it. About 10 minutes later, I shut down the register, tidied up, and clocked out around 10:15. As I walked out to my car, I noticed the same man still in the parking lot. He wasn't inside his vehicle. He was just standing there next to it, hands hanging at his sides, staring toward the store. I got in my car and drove home, trying not to think too much of it. The next day I had off, so I stayed up later than usual. I didn't crawl into bed until around 1 a.m. But shortly after lying down, I noticed a bright light flood into my room from one of the windows. I figured a neighbor had pulled into their driveway, no big deal. A second later the light went out, and I thought, yep, just headlights. I was asleep in minutes. Sometime during the night I was pulled out of sleep by what I thought was my phone ringing. I was still halfway in a dream, so it took a second to realize what was happening. I reached over and tapped the screen, but there were no calls, no messages, nothing. I was still groggy and about to roll over and ignore it, when something small but strange caught my attention. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, not wide open, just barely unlatched. That might not seem like much, but I always close my door completely before going to sleep. Seeing it open even a crack snapped me fully awake. I got out of bed and walked over, gently pushing it closed. It shut without resistance, just like normal, which told me I had closed it earlier. That's when the uneasiness hit me hard. My chest tightened, and I could feel the adrenaline rush, but I kept trying to convince myself that maybe there was some logical explanation. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of that bright light outside, right before I'd fallen asleep. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was a car parked in my driveway. I couldn't see the whole vehicle, just the back half, but it was enough panic set in. Someone was at my house, and worse, someone might be inside. I hurried back to the door and flicked the light switch on. My thoughts were racing. I decided I needed to call the police, even just for peace of mind. I looked toward the nightstand where my phone was still sitting, and just as I started to step toward it, I saw something. A single eye watching me through the narrow crack of the closet door. My entire body froze. I gasped and bolted for the front door, running out of the house as fast as I could. I went from house to house until I finally found a neighbor who was awake and willing to call the cops. By the time officers arrived, probably 15 minutes later, the car was still in my driveway, but whoever had been inside was gone. They were able to trace the vehicle easily. My stomach turned when they confirmed it belonged to the same man who'd been coming into the store, that guy. His explanation for everything made no sense, but what was clear was that he had been watching me for some time, and he had no good intentions. Looking back now, I think the only reason I woke up that night was because his phone rang while he was hiding in my closet, and he silenced it just as I stirred. If not for that, I honestly don't know what would have happened, or if I'd even still be here to wonder about it.